Broadcasting under the night sky from the edge of an undisclosed jungle on the Gulf of Mexico, I'm Christopher Garetano, your voice in the night. For the next hour, allow me to be your guide into the bizarre unknown, the fantastic macabre, and together we'll journey to that borderland between fiction and reality, a place beyond all rational explanation. We are now off to the witch.
There was a big, huge object on the left of the road, and I rolled the window down in the car, and this thing was approximately 3.5, 4 feet wide, about 6, 7 foot tall. And the odor of this animal, after I rolled the window down, was so offensive that I couldn't remain there any longer. And I was scared, too. And I've been around the mountains and around animals a lot, and this thing truly scared me.
That was an interview recorded in 1977 that originally aired on the immortal TV series In Search Of, with host the mighty Leonard Nimoy. The subject was Bigfoot, a North American legend also known by native lore as Sasquatch, a large elusive hominid, a wild man of the shadowy forests that still, no matter how many witnesses tell their tale, remains one of our greatest mysteries. Documented sightings, much like the one described, date back many centuries and have variations all over the world. In the Himalayas, it's called the Yeti. In Australia, the Yowie. And in the mountains of western China, it's called the Yeren. One commonality that's certain amongst thousands of reports over the years is that we have yet to capture any variation of the enigmatic creature. But within the vast alumni of witnesses, there were and are a group of credible anthropologists, including the late Dr. Grover Krantz.
Its locomotion is the human design, so we know it's probably our closest living relative. But in terms of anything mental characteristics, no, it's not human. So it is a mixture of ape and human characteristics. And if you want to call that a missing link, that's fine.
Dr. Krantz was a dedicated researcher, as well as a firm believer in the stories. And in the interview, he further commented on the credibility of the famous Bigfoot Patterson-Gimlin film.
All of the anatomy of the creature is perfectly consistent. It just simply does not fit with a man wearing a suit. In fact, a suit of that size, we can establish exactly how big it is. There's no way a man could fit into it. The shoulders and chest are simply too wide.
Many other figures of credibility, including anthropologist Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, journalist and author John Green, and even primatologist Jane Goodall, believe in the existence of this undiscovered species. But also numerous family and community leaders that would otherwise not tell tall tales have all had their encounters with the creature. Tonight, we'll speak with a man who not only has his own Bigfoot story to tell, but also several other yarns born from the many doorways of the vast unknown. I'll return after this commercial break.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
No one wanted to talk about it. No one would admit they had seen or heard it. The law told them to quit asking questions or leave town. Maybe folks felt if they didn't talk about the thing, it would go away. But these curious college boys wouldn't stay away from Black Lake. And that was a mistake. The Creature from Black Lake is coming to a theater near you, a Jim McCullough production.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garetano, and tonight's guest is a paranormal renaissance man. He's lived a life of stark reality in the form of both the military and law enforcement. His name is Dave Spinks, an author and an explorer. His experiences with the unknown date back to his childhood, and tonight he'll tell his story. So here's my interview with Dave Spinks.
I was born in a little town called Gassaway, West Virginia. But I grew up kind of all over the place because my mom and dad were divorced when I was just a little guy. But the first couple of years of my life was here in West Virginia, and then my mom was remarried, and I actually grew up most of my young adult life in New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico. So of course, I was back and forth visiting relatives, both on my mom and dad's side and my father here in West Virginia. So at a very young age, I was doing a lot of traveling around the country, so to speak.
Were they similar family lives, or it was different between your mom and your dad?
It was definitely different. My dad was in the military, in the Army, in 82nd Airborne, and my stepdad was actually in the Air Force. So that part of it was fairly similar. But my dad not being in the military no more versus my stepdad being in the military, I had a very kind of a structured life into sports. School and sports was the main thing, and that's really how it all began for me in my early part of my life. It was a fairly structured life, and I was around military stuff my entire life. So saw some pretty crazy things. I was able to walk around all kinds of top secret aircraft and different things as a young man.
Well, I'm assuming you felt the power of that as a kid, or did you realize, looking back in hindsight, the magnitude of being able to and the privilege of being around stuff like that as a kid?
Oh, absolutely. Because, when you realize and you see how, so my stepdad was a mechanic on the big General's airplane. So we were privy to seeing a lot of cool stuff, and meeting those guys. And then you hear scuttlebutt, you hear them talking about different things, and you see how the underlings react when the big boss is around. I mean, they run around like a bunch of just getting in order and standing at attention, and you get to see that kind of stuff, and you're like, wow, that guy's got a lot of power, and he's super cool, and he's letting us walk around all these jets and look in the cockpits as a young kid, and it's really neat to be privy to some cool stuff like that.
So you grew up around tangible things, you did things. But around that time when you were a kid, did you have any interest whatsoever in what we call the paranormal or mysteries of the universe? Because I also know, this was the 70s, right?
Yes.
So in the 70s, did you have an interest? Were you bitten by that bug in the 70s?
Oh yeah, I was fascinated as a younger man, at a younger boy, with the show Land of the Lost, with the slee stack and the dinosaurs and these weird pyramids with crystals, and they could transport you through dimensions. And of course, as a young man, you really don't get the whole spiel of that. You don't understand all that, but that was fascinating to me, that you could go back in time somehow through this accidental earthquake that drops you into uh, the underworld of the earth, and it's like dinosaur times. But in reality, there's portals and everything else in that show. I had two profound experiences as a young man that literally set me on this course that I'm on today, that really shaped my life. I would often come back and spend time with my grandparents, both sets of them, and my dad and everybody. And me and my grandfather would often go on hunting or fishing trips here in West Virginia together. And this happened to be one of those times. We went on the Gauley River here in Nicholas County on a fishing trip. And we would stay at least a day or two. We'd camp out overnight and just have a great time. And on this particular occasion, we got there. It was late afternoon, and we had to set up our gear and everything. And, I was begging to get my line in the water, and he's like, well, we got to get the firewood and we got to get the tent. And he's like, but go ahead, because he knew how excited I was. And while he was doing some things around the camp, I latched onto a really nice trout, and it was a big one, and I was having problems getting it in, and he came over and helped me get it in there, and it was a nice sized rainbow. And ended up being that we caught our limit of trout for the day, and we actually cleaned them and cooked them up right there at the camp that evening. And it was getting just a short time before dark, probably a half an hour or so before dark. And in that particular canyon where the river is, it's pretty deep. The sun sets earlier than normal because it goes behind the mountains, and it gets darker quick in the canyon. So we had eaten our trout and all the food that we brought. Grandma sent cornbread, and it was just a great evening. And we were sitting there so stuffed we couldn't hardly move. When out of nowhere, this humongous splash hits the water. And I'm not talking about just some kind of little average fish jumping in the water. I'm talking something with some serious weight hitting the water, so much so that it imploded and the water exploded out and made drops come down. Almost like, the only way I know how to describe it is, remember when we were kids and we jumped off the diving board and we did cannonballs, and it goes kaboom and it explodes out and rains down water. That's what it was like in the middle of the river. So in that particular stretch of river, the river is probably about 50 to 60 yards across. It's a really good sized river. It's really deep in some spots, and it runs pretty fast. So we jumped out of our chairs going, what in the world was that? Because we knew it wasn't any kind of fish to make a splash like that. If it was, it would have had to been the size of a great white shark or an orca or something, something that big. So we're looking around trying to figure out, going, what in the world made a splash like that? We're trying to rationally weigh it out. Did a rock roll off the cliff and go in the water and we just didn't hear it or see it? Nah, that doesn't make sense. Did a huge tree branch fall off one of the trees and hit the water? Well, no, that doesn't make sense either, because we would have seen the branch floating. So there was no explanation. So after several minutes of trying to figure this out, we just kind of sat down dumbfounded back in our, chairs around the fire. We're like, man, that was so weird. What could have made a splash that big? And we didn't see anything. So while we were doing this, out of my left peripheral vision, I hear something coming through the trees, and then I see this big boulder, like the size of, I can't even compare it, like a grown man would have a hard time getting both his arms around it. It was that big, coming upwards from the other side of the river through the tree limbs and hit out into the water and make another splash. And of course, we both saw it then because we heard it clipping tree limbs as it came out in, over through the trees into the river. Then we jump up and we're like, what in the world? And my grandpa immediately yells out, "You hoodlums, knock it off, or I'm gonna shoot." I'm not kidding. So in his mind, he's already thinking that people are messing with us from the other side of the river. Well, these rocks hit out in the middle of the river, number one. Number two, the rocks were so big, there's no way in heck a human being could have thrown a rock that big that far. It would have had to have been launched off of some sort of catapult. Okay, that's how big these things were. They were, I would say, like the size of maybe 8 basketballs put together or something like that, trying to give some kind of comparison on the width and thickness of these things, and to make a splash that big. So he's yelling over there, and as he got done yelling, "You knock it off, or I'm going to shoot," I'm not kidding, the most guttural, god-awful howling, growling sound came from the woods on that side of the river. I mean, and to this day, whenever I almost have like a sort of PTSD from it, because it sends shivers from the top of my spine down to my toes when I recall it, and it just makes the hair on my arm stand up and everything. Comes from over there, and I look to my grandpa, and he's gone. And I look, and he's running toward the tent. And I know, okay, it's about to get, the proverbial crap is about to hit the fan, right? He's going to grab the gun. And I'm standing there as a 13-year-old boy, just scared to death, can't even move. I'm frozen with fear, so to speak, right? And he comes running back, and this thing over there is howling and making the most guttural, weirdest sounds. I've never heard anything like it. And I grew up in the woods, mind you, hunting and fishing, even in New Mexico and here in West Virginia. So he goes over there, and he stands next to me, and we're on the riverbank, and all we have is an old squirrel gun that we carry for snakes and such when we're fishing. It's nothing that's going to do any damage, especially at that distance. And he cracks off a round over there. Well, the thing goes ballistic then. I mean, he doesn't even know what it is, and we can't see what he took a shot at. So he thinks, in his mind, I think still, that it's people, and he would scare them off by shooting a squirrel gun with squirrel shot in it 70 yards away that wouldn't do anything but pepper something and burn them a little bit, it'd light them up, but it wouldn't hurt nobody. So that thing starts literally, the trees start shaking, it's screaming and yelling over there. And the trees that it's shaking they're like 40, 50, 60-foot saplings. And it's shaking them like it's nothing. Like a human could not even come close to doing that. And as this madness is going on, I'm just sitting there shaking. I mean, I'm literally about ready to relieve myself in my pants. Seriously, I was shaking. I was scared to death. And he cracks off 4 or 5 shots. And as he's doing this, it's a single shot. So he has to shoot around, crack the barrel, take the old shell out, put the new one in, and fire another shot. And every time he does, it gets worse and worse. And he finally yells at me after firing 3 or 4 shots and says, "Get to the truck, boy." The truck's parked about 20 or 30 yards from us. I run to the front of the bumper. I'm peeking my head around, looking in that direction. And I'm squatting down behind the tire in the front left driver's side quarter panel, just popping my head around, hoping that whatever this monster or whatever is going on doesn't see me. And as he's cracking off round after round, he must have fired 6, 7, 8 shots. I don't even know. I didn't, I was too in the moment to even count, but I did hear, I distinctly remember the shots going off. And then you could start tracking the movement of whatever this thing was by the tree shakes and the brush that it was tearing down literally as it went up and away from us, up the other side of the riverbank, which is a valley and it's a mountain basically. And it's very rugged over there, and it's too dangerous for people to even fish on some sides of that where that thing was. So as I'm watching this thing, there's a clearing there with just some high like grass, probably, really high grass for people, probably up to my chest as a 13-year-old boy. And I see this thing come out into the opening, and it's a tall, giant man covered in hair. Never saw its face. It never looked back at us. I just saw it from about the waist up, but it had a little tiny head and it looked like a monkey from behind, and massive shoulders that were probably 3 times as wide or more than my grandfather. And my grandfather was 6'4", big man. And this thing dwarfed him, and this is about 50 yards from us, and I could see it clear as a bell, covered in brownish, blackish hair, never looked back at us, and it went up and away. Well, at that time, I look and my grandfather's running, and I knew then that he must have seen it too. So he literally grabbed me with one arm, opened the truck driver's side door, and slung me through the cab. And the only thing that stopped me from going completely through the cab was the door was shut on the other side. Otherwise, I would have went. I mean, that's how hard he chucked me into the truck cab. He jumped in the truck and said, "That's not of God, son. We're getting out of here." And he fired the truck up, and we were peeled out of there, bottoming out. It sounded like the truck was going to fall apart because he was hitting these huge potholes, because it's really rugged in there to get down in there. And it's like a 3 or 4 mile ride down in there to get to where we were on an old road, logging road, and it's just full of potholes and big ditches and everything. And I got my head buried in my hands because I think, oh my God, the truck's going to break down and that thing's going to come and kill us. We're going to die out here. I'm just scared to death. Well, after what seemed like an eternity, we finally get up on the hard road and we drive around for like 15, 20 minutes. He's not saying a word. And then he finally just pulls off the side of the road and he looked at me and he said, "Son, we better not tell no one about this. They're going to think we're crazy." And here he is. He's a Baptist minister and he has a flock that he has to worry about. And, we kind of made a pact right then and there that we wouldn't talk about it. And he refused to talk about it with me, which was really frustrating because to him, that was a demon. And you don't talk about those things because that brings them closer to you, so to speak.
And I'm sure at that time you said to yourself, "This is a Sasquatch. This is Bigfoot."
Well, no, because I never knew what a Bigfoot was at that time.
So at that time you hadn't been exposed. There was no.
No, I had no clue what a Bigfoot was. Never heard of anything of the like. Now, the old timers we used to think they messed with us, and they would say, "Don't stay after dark because the wood boogers will get you." Well, I didn't even know what they meant by a wood booger, number one. Number two, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I thought they were just messing with us, and it turns out they really weren't messing with us around here. In my eyes now. So as a young man, this literally changed my life. I didn't go in the woods for like 6, 7 years after that. And when I finally did start going back out to camp a little bit, I only went to very public locations where there was a lot of people camping, and I wouldn't go far in the woods. It really took me a long time to get over that.
So you were terrified.
Oh, I was terrified. I had nightmares about it for years. I would wake up in cold sweats.
At what point did you come across any kind of literature or TV show? Because I know at the time in the 70s, Bigfoot was like being incorporated into like, the Incredible Hulk and all these other things.
Yeah. And see, I had actually seen that episode and didn't realize that's what I didn't even know what that was until later after my encounter. I started putting things together, and I'm like, oh man, that's what they showed in what was it, the $6 Million Man,
Right, the 6
and all
million.
that stuff. And I said, that's what we saw.
So what you were having was such a real experience. It's different than sitting there watching TV, that you're in the woods, it's dark, and now there's this thing screaming.
Yes.
And I'm trying to establish that for the audience who's never been out camping, who's never understood, we read about these things, but when it actually happens to you, it's such a different thing. Can you describe a little bit about that feeling?
Yeah, because like I said, I've been in the woods my whole life. You're used to the wood sounds when you're deer hunting and everything else. The scariest thing you'll ever hear around these woods usually is a bobcat scream, and it sounds like a woman being murdered. And it was totally different. Or you'll hear the occasional coyotes and stuff yelling and howling and yelping, but this was totally different. It was so deep, so guttural, and so loud that it like reverberated, almost like when you're at a rock concert and you can feel the bass going through your stomach coming out of those giant speakers. And being in that canyon, if you've ever been in any canyon situations where you yell and you get that echo, it just echoed down through that river canyon like you wouldn't believe. And it was so surreal and so terrifying because it was that powerful and that loud. It's really hard to describe the feeling you had because it was, when they talk about the fear, your fight or flight, the fight or flight thing, you either freeze or you haul butt out of there. And as a young man, I was just frozen with fear. I could not move until my grandpa yelled at me, like he screamed at me and said, "Get to the truck, boy." And when that snapped me out of that whole frozen, and I ran to the truck, and I didn't know what to do then. And I just squatted down and hid, kind of catty corner and looking in the direction where all this ruckus was coming from, until he literally came and picked me up and threw me in the truck because I was still frozen with fear by the time I got over there. So it was so loud and so guttural that it terrified me, and I had nightmares about it, for years. And it really affected me. So then, with him not wanting to talk about that anymore, I had to resort to going to the local libraries, going to the school library. We didn't have the internet the internet wasn't even anywhere in the talks in 1983. I'm sure they were talking about it, but there was nothing like it out there.
Oh, we had no access to that.
No access to anything like that. So, lo and behold, slowly but surely, I started discovering articles about the Yeti and all these different similar type of creatures that I had this experience with being seen all around the world. And then lo and behold, I remembered, the $6 Million Man episode, and then I saw the show In Search Of, and they so happened to be doing a Bigfoot episode. The first time I saw it, the one with Leonard Nimoy, and I was like, that's what I saw. I'm not crazy. These things are real, and they're not just here; they're all over the world. And it was like this light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, man, I got to know more about this stuff. And I started on my own search, started reading anything I could find on this stuff. And at the same time, I was also fascinated with the pyramids and different things like that. And it all just started snowballing for me.
So would you say it was that encounter with this beast was so profound that you went through this evolution, when finally you started doing the research? Number one, did it put you at ease a little bit? And then the second part would be, it must have opened up a floodgate to all other varieties of mysteries that were happening around the world. Did those two things happen? Did it put you at ease, and did it open up a deluge of interest in other things?
Yeah, and I came to the realization very quickly that there's things out there we just don't understand, and people don't talk about it, and it's there. I've seen one. I've seen it with my own eyes. You hear the funny story when you're a kid back in those days. You would hear about aliens and UFOs and all that stuff. And me and my other see my the funny thing about me, Christopher, is both my most profound experiences oddly enough happened with both of my grandfathers. So my other grandfather, my mom's dad, he was fascinated by aliens and different things like that, right? And we used to talk about that too because I was so interested in all this stuff because of my Bigfoot experience. Me and him actually watched the alien autopsy video when it first was released on national television together, and we talked about it. And he goes, and then he started filling me in on some of the experiences he had in West Virginia as a kid in the woods and things that happened to him and things he's seen that he couldn't explain. And it was fascinating, and it just kept snowballing a little at a time for me, a little bit more. And then the most profound experience I had that started me off in this was, so he was also a World War II veteran, and he was dying. He had cancer, and he smoked like a freight train, smoked the old Camel non-filtered cigarettes. And he had gotten, during the war, he got pneumonia in both of his lungs. So he only had like a quarter of one lung capacity left. And he had a stoma for oxygen in his throat. And he would smoke those Camels in the stoma hole in his throat. And I was like, man, Grandpa, you're so sick. And why do you keep smoking? He goes, well, we all got to die sometime, boy,
Wow.
I was like, well, why you got to speed it up? I'm going to miss you. I don't want you to go, But, and we had both me and both my grandfathers had a pretty tight relationship. And so when I was 16, I was at my dad's house, which is 30 miles away from this grandfather's house I'm talking about, my mom's dad. And for some reason, in the middle of the night, I sat straight up in the bed, and there's my mom's dad standing at the foot of the bed. Now, there's no reason he should have been there. He was my mom's dad, and they had been divorced since I was 2. And I'm like, I kind of wiped my fingers in my eyes going, what are you doing here, Grandpa? And he's like, he didn't say anything. He just smiled at me. And I noticed he looked really good, and he was solid. He wasn't the typical ghost description you see of a transparent being or whatever. He was solid as me and you. And he just smiled, and then he disappeared right in front of my face. And I was like, whoa, that was a freaky dream. What was that? And I chalked it up as a dream, and I went back to sleep. So the next day when I woke up, that was on my mind, that whole dream situation, what I was calling a dream. And I called up there immediately. And my uncle from out of state answered the phone. And I said, what are you doing there? I said, what are you doing there? And he said, nobody called you yet, Dave? And I said, no, why? What are you talking about? He said, well, Grandpa died last night. We're coming in for the funeral. I'm like, oh my God. And I just dropped the phone. I was like stunned and in awe of, I'm like, holy crap, I had this weird dream about him and he died last night. And I was just stupefied by this. And I didn't say anything to anyone. And long story short, we went to the funeral, all that. Well, about 4 or 5 months later, a bunch of us were visiting Grandma. We were at her house eating dinner. A bunch of the family was there, not all of them, but a bunch of them. And we're eating dinner, and that little voice in my head is saying, tell them about the dream, tell them about the dream, tell them about the. I was like thinking, man, they're going to think I'm freaking nuts or I'm full of it or whatever. So I finally came out with it just in front of everybody. It was like that E.F. Hutton commercial. Everybody just stopped, and they're listening to me tell the story about the dream of Grandpa. And I noticed several members of my family, a lot of them, their faces all turned white. And they all started saying, I had the same dream. I had the same dream. I had the same dream. And I knew right there that, holy crap, it was like he came to say goodbye before he went to wherever he was going. And that was another just profound personal situation that I could not explain. And, me and him would talk about these things all the time. And here I have this profound ghostly experience of my dead grandfather visiting me the night he died. And it was, and I wasn't the only one. Several members of my family all had the same exact quotation mark dream. So here it is. Now I'm really snowballing into this stuff. And I'm like, man, there is so much more out there. The very beginnings of my my hobby of investigating and researching the paranormal. And it wasn't long, I was already hooked on the In Search Of show because I've seen the Bigfoot episode. And I was, after that whole experience with my grandfather dying and me seeing him in the dream, I saw another episode, and the first American ghost hunter, Hans Holzer, was on there, and he so happened to have a tape recorder almost exactly like the one I had just gotten for Christmas. And he was doing EVP work. And I said, I can do that. And that's when I started as a young man going on family vacations with my stepdad and stuff. We would often go to, we went to Mesa Verde in Colorado, Four Corners, all of these Native American locations and these different historical places. And I started doing EVPs. And the very first EVP I caught was drumming and chanting at Mesa Verde in Colorado.
Before we go any further, just for the people that don't know, because some people don't, can you explain to me what EVP stands for and what it is and how you use it?
So EVP is electronic voice phenomena. It is when unknown voices are captured either via on magnetic tape or digital recorders, and it is thought to be the voices of the dead or residual energy happenings. There's different ways you can look at it. It's fascinating stuff. You ask questions and you listen for some sort of response. And oftentimes you will get either a voice response or you'll capture specific noises that are like in my case, I caught the drumming sound and there was nobody out there doing any kind of reenactments or any other people that we saw that day because it was in the middle of the week. So it's phenomena. It's unexplainable with a rational scientific explanation. And they're often captured at a specific hertz that's lower than human hearing, and magnetic tape or digital recording devices often capture these voices or these unexplained noises.
So after those two profound experiences, and you were set on this journey, and you were still a young guy when you were conducting EVPs, and I'm sure you were trying a variety of different things to make contact with, to I don't know if it was to prove these mysteries or just to experience more. Did you feel like you wanted to experience more?
Oh yeah, I mean it was almost. It still is. I don't want to say it's a thrill when you capture something truly unexplainable. You're like, it's just fascinating. You're in a building all by yourself. You've checked it out. There's no other human living people in there. And you ask a question and you have a recording device going. And then when you play it back, you have a response to your question. And for a fact, there's no other living people in that area with you anywhere close to you. It's just one of those things that's truly fascinating. At least to me, it is. I mean, I'm like, how does that even happen? So there's so many and to me, it's kind of like my mantra, three of man's greatest unanswered questions. And it's kind of why I do what I do. Are we alone in the universe? What happens to us when we die? And are there unknown creatures walking among us? Those are three of man's greatest, really unanswered questions, but they are being answered in some way, shape, or form.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
The legend of Bogy Creek tells it like it happened. Through the eyes of the big Technoscope cameras, you will see wildlife living with nature, a treat you will not soon forget. This is the setting for the new motion picture, Legend of Bogy Creek, filmed entirely on location around Fouke, Arkansas. It is the true story of the Fouke monster. This motion picture is being acclaimed by the motion picture industry as a strong contender for that industry's top award, the Academy. The Legend of Bogy Creek, color by Technicolor, is a P&L film production presentation.
And for the folks that don't consider it, at least, you know, part of me understands why they shy away from it, whether it be fear or, unfortunately, hucksters leech on to every possible thing you can think of. So those people take credit away from that. But you can't ignore, if you just do the slightest research, that there are credible people throughout history that have had all of those experiences. At what point did you join law enforcement? How old were you?
So during my young years, I was in high school, and then I was playing baseball, and I was good enough to get scholarships to play baseball in college. And after college, I dabbled a little bit in some semi-pro ball, and then my mom was killed in a motorcycle accident in '92, and I decided to go in because my brother was still in high school, and I went into the military. That's when I first went in the military, and myself to help support him a little bit and make sure he got through high school and everything. And then I got hurt in the military. I blew my knee out and had a few operations, and they were going to stick me on a desk, and that wasn't my gig, and I decided to get out of the military, out of the U.S. Air Force, and I went into federal law enforcement, and did that in, let's see, 2002. I began working in state corrections for a short time while I was getting all my stuff together for federal law enforcement. And that's what I did. I went into federal law enforcement with the Bureau of Prisons. And then I started, I was doing all kinds of different jobs like transporting high profile terrorists and mafioso and all kinds of people. We worked hand in hand with the U.S. Marshals a lot and doing different various jobs in the federal prison system, so to speak. And that's what I did. And then I did my 20 years of government time and got out and retired. And the whole time I was investigating and researching the paranormal,
So, any point in time, because you were in both the Air Force and you were in law enforcement during that time period, and it was a 20-year plus period, right?
Oh, yeah.
So did you have any other experiences during that time period that you had shared with me?
I had several, Christopher, and I over the years of doing this, I had some situations happen to me personally that made me kind of remember things in my young childhood that makes me believe that there was a lot more to to me personally than I even realized when it comes to this stuff. But the next profound experience I had personally was when I was in state corrections. Oftentimes we would have to take inmates to hospitals for treatment for various diseases, illnesses, whatever, and a lot of times these guys would die because their bodies were so trashed from doing so much drugs and everything else that they had major medical issues. So this one particular guy, he had a heart attack, and one of my jobs was I would transport, like I said, inmates to hospitals and everything. So when I was on transport duty, I'd run these guys out, and if they had to go out by ambulance, then we have to have a guy in the ambulance with them, and then there's another chase car behind them, So in this particular situation, I had just come back from a court run, and I got the call on the radio that a guy was going out in the ambulance. So I had to go down there and dress him out and everything. You have to search him and put him in different clothes and cuff him up and everything, belly chain, handcuffs, and leg shackles. So as I'm doing this, I'm talking to the guy, and he was telling me all about he didn't feel right yesterday. He thought he might have had a heart attack, but they just gave him some like a milk of magnesia and sent him back to his cell. Well, he came back and he had all the signs the next day of a heart attack, so they were sending him out to the hospital. As I'm talking to this guy, he literally like had a massive heart attack right in front of me, where his whole body seized up, his face turned blood red, and his tongue popped out of his mouth as the ambulance was getting there and started loading him on the gurney. And the guy, even the EMT guy, looked at me and mouthed the words, "He's faking it." And then he looked back at him again. As he started looking at him, he started pumping his chest, and he looked back and he said, "No, he's not faking it." So we loaded him up, got him on the road real quick, as fast as we could, and got him down to the hospital. So we're in there with the guy. They're working on him, and during the whole ambulance ride, they tried to trach him and everything, and he was already dead. His heart basically exploded right in front of us, and they worked on him for a good hour, and he died. So when that happens, one of us has to go out and call our bosses and start, telling them all what happened, and the other guy has to sit in the room with them until the doctor comes in, pronounces him legally dead. And there's this whole process that takes place, right? So I'm sitting in the room with the guy. The nurses and doctors pronounce him dead, and they turn off all the lights except for the little light above his bed. There's, those little fluorescent lights they keep behind your bed in the hospital rooms. So a few minutes is going by, and that just this weird, ominous feeling comes over me in the room, and the light starts buzzing and flickering behind his bed. And I'm like, man, it feels weird in here. And it was almost like time slowed down for, it seemed like everything started moving in slow motion. And I noticed this giant shadow figure looking thing in the corner. It was darker than the dark room. The room wasn't totally dark because the little fluorescent light was in the room on, but it was buzzing and flickering and making this weird flashing stuff thing. And I started looking closer at this shadow thing, and it was like 10 to 12 feet tall. And I noticed that it was smoky in nature, and it was undulating. And I'm like, what in the frick is that? So, I mean, I could feel the ominous feeling in the room. So I stood up, and I'm thinking there's somebody in the room with me. And I'm trying to like rub my eyes and make sure I'm seeing what I'm seeing. And I know there's no other people in the room because I watched them all leave, all the nurses and doctors. So I stand up, and I got my hand on my pistol, and I'm like, hey, who's in here? But I can see this shadow figure thing over in the corner of the room. And this is a big room, and it's all separate from the normal hospital rooms because the prisons usually have a contract area with the hospitals, and they keep them separate from the general hospital population. So I reach back with my other hand, with my left hand, and I'm feeling for the light switch, right? And it's starting to feel really just heavier and heavier. I have this weird, just horrible feeling in there. And I flick the light switch on, and the shadow is gone. It's not there anymore. So I'm like, man, I must be tired. Because I think I was on a double shift that day, too. I was like, man, I'm really tired. I need to go home and go to sleep. So, I sat back down, turned the light back off, and I'm looking at the guy's body. Of course, they got him covered up, with a sheet. And this white, misty, smoky, whatever you want to call it, starts coming out of his chest. And I'm like, what in the hell is going on here? And I said, I must be losing my mind right now. And I start standing up again, and I hear this far off voice say, no, I don't want to go, like that. And I'm like, holy crap. And I reach up to flick the light on again, and it's all buzzing and stuff in there. That fluorescent light's going bzz, bzz, and it's, flickering, and it's just like time is in slow motion. I finally get the light turned on because I'm fluttering around with my hand trying to find the light switch, never taking my eye off of this dead guy here. And just as I flick the light on, my partner kicks open the door and said, hey, I'm back. And I like that. And it scared me to death. I almost jumped out of my boots, and I said, I got to take a break. And I ran out of there while he watched him. So I'm thinking, what in the hell did I just? It was almost like the Grim Reaper came to collect this guy, and he said, "No, I don't want to go." And it was this most bizarre freaking experience. And that really shook me up too, for a little while
Did
because
anybody else around you at that time experience?
no, I was in the room by myself because everybody else knew he was dead, and I was just doing my job guarding him. I had to guard him till our boss got there. I mean, that's what we do. So when I came back, after I ran in the bathroom and washed my face with cold water, and I was like, man, am I tired here? What is going on? And I just, it was just the most bizarre thing. And I knew it was real, though. I could feel it. You could feel the ominousness of it, the heaviness. And it was like he was going to go somewhere bad because of all the bad things he had done. So, you know,
Yeah, I mean, these stories have been told throughout human history. And when you experience one, it's such a strong thing. It stays with you forever. We all have different stories, and I don't have a multitude of experiences, but the three that I had, I'll never forget, ever. And I know it really happened. And the thing is, you know, you've had some really stark, powerful, and the way you tell the stories are fantastic. But I know it's coming from a place of true experience. At any point in time, did you ever challenge what was happening, try to dismiss it, try to talk it away, try to say it was this, or that, as opposed to accepting what you were experiencing at the time, which is what I think you've done?
no, I didn't because I was such in awe of and frightened as well because it was almost like I don't know how to explain it. Like I was on one side of a mirror and I was looking in this mirror or this window and I was watching this happen. And I was there, but it wasn't interacting with me. I was just privy to seeing it go down, if that makes sense.
It does.
And I could feel the heaviness, I could feel it, I could see the smokiness, the dark shadow type figure thing. But it wasn't physically affecting me other than me going, what in the heck am I witnessing here? In that particular case, anyway.
At what point did you solidify that you were going to look into the unknown, and that's the entire collection of the unknown for the rest of your life? I mean, I know you've been doing it all this time, but at what point did the shift from it being kind of a hobby to now being your life?
Over the years, like even when I was in college and in the military, and then later in law enforcement, my friends knew what I did. They knew I was into this. I did it. I was conducting investigations into things. People would call me, and maybe one of their family members or a friend would say, "Hey, I got some weird stuff in my house going on," and it was kind of word of mouth. Like, "Hey, I know a guy that does that," and I'd get a phone call, or someone Joe Blow down the road would see these strange lights in the sky. I'd get a phone call. So it was kind of word of mouth back in those days, and that's basically how my investigating career on the side, of my regular jobs. I was doing it all the time on my off time. When I decided to say, okay, I'm going to go public with this because, being in my job, both of my jobs, military and law enforcement and things, I didn't go public with what I was doing. Over the years, I'd actually filmed some stuff for the church during some exorcisms and other things because I always put it out there that I'm more than willing to help and learn. Over the years, you make contacts with clergy member and asking them questions, trying to find out what's going on in certain places and everything else. I got out of law enforcement, retired because I did my time and I was hurt too on top of that. So I was just like, man, I've had enough of this. Because the doctor was like, dude, if you're fighting a thug or somebody and you fall wrong, you're going to be in a wheelchair. So I decided to hang it up. And I was sitting there saying one day, what am I going to do now? And the light bulb went off. And I said, you know what? I've been doing this stuff for a lot of years. I'm just going to go public with it and keep doing what I'm doing and do it even more. I just launched myself into this nonstop, just investigation after investigation and after investigation. And I started writing books about my experiences at that time too. And it just went crazy, when I told my Bigfoot story in a book and I had interviewed state troopers and doctors and lawyers in the state of West Virginia. I wrote my story and then also input all their stories, their encounters. I decided to go public with it. And I retired in 2011, 12-ish. And I started writing the books and just full bore, nonstop investigating.
In one part, are you chasing that thrill, and the other part is, in all of this time, what's the most solid piece of evidence for each of the varieties that you explore? Have you found things that you can say, hey, this is close to evidence, because you've spent so much time on it?
Yeah, well, over the years, I've experienced so many things and captured some really just fascinating pieces of evidence. And it's so, I mean, it's so surreal because it's like, man, it is like chasing the dragon. You know what I mean? Because you're like, man, I've experienced so many things and captured some really cool pieces of evidence over the years that are just over the top. That what do you do next? But you never know what you're going to get when you do this stuff, Christopher. I mean, when's the day that maybe a full body apparition sits down with you and you have some sort of interaction and you got it on camera? You never know what's going to happen. Some of the best evidence, I've captured is I've got full blown shadow figures on video when I know for a fact it was not caused by any living human or animal of any sort. It was a straight up apparition that formed, manifested, and moved across into the field of view of the camera, and along with just countless EVPs over the years, and and also having been I would say attacked in several different ways over the years. One time I would say I definitely feel like I had an attachment that really affected my life in a purely negative manner. I've been scratched by things unseen. I had my head hit. I was hit on the head at an investigation. Um, Nothing was captured on camera, but I physically felt it. And then I had a knot on my head with a gash in my head. And then the ghost box responded to a friend of mine who I was investigating with that he hit me in the head with a shovel. Everybody saw me. Everybody knew I never fell down, never hit my head, anything.
Do you find it frustrating that with all of these eyewitnesses, including yourself, and like I said, throughout human history, very credible people have had this variety of experiences as well? Do you find it frustrating that the scientific community or even the political community seems to shy away from these things? In certain pockets, though, there are scientists that are exploring this, but very few. Do you find it frustrating that they won't? And why do you think they won't?
I often equate it to it's almost like religion and politics. Unless someone has their own experience, you're not going to change their mind. All I do as an investigator is say, hey, my reputation. This is where I was. This is what I was doing, and this is what happened, and this is what I got. Because without your reputation, you're just another story. It's just another story, and it's really hard to convince somebody that, hey, there's stuff, unknown things, and unexplainable things going on all around us all the time. If you look into the whole string theory and quantum physics, I mean, there's things being discovered that are just amazing.
Oh,
Um,
sure. And that's what I was referring to. It seems the people in science won't just outright say, well, these are beings from other dimensions. What they are talking about is saying that there are other dimensions, and we're able to say that now through quantum physics. Another thing I wanted to ask you is, how do you feel about the governments of the world now making it official, and you can't even call it soft disclosure anymore, that the previously unidentified craft, they are saying it's not from any human technology or earthly origin, which only leaves a couple of options to identify.
right.
How do you?
Well, I like to say, I told you so, but because, we've been talking about this stuff for years, and we know. And here's the thing with all of this. I truly and honestly believe that our real history, um, and everything else we've been lied to about. I really believe that because there are forces and entities out there that, and I'm going down the rabbit hole here, but this is my personal opinion on a lot of this stuff. Yeah, and there's absolute corruptness going on with the people who run the world governments, and and all these other folks, because it's all about money, greed, and power. Even the whole UFO enigma, there's so many things that we've been not told the truth about.
So if you could predict where this will be, let's say in 25 years, and what I mean by this is the variety of analysis by independent parties, ghost hunters, UFO enthusiasts, even people searching for cryptids. Do you feel there'll be an advance and collection of evidence, not only that, but also in perspective? And it seems like a lot of people are more open to it than ever, in my opinion. What I think is a great disservice, and this is just my opinion, is the overabundance of fakery on television. And so whenever I approach something, I'm just a guy who's interested, but I won't fake it. I'm not, and I feel you're very much the same because you had very real experiences. Why fake it? It's so much more interesting to talk about these things, tell these stories. And do you feel like that's going to kind of dissipate? Because again, with every mystery, as credible as it may seem, as much evidence as you may have, hucksters attach themselves to these things constantly, even religion. But it doesn't mean that we should discredit. It doesn't mean we should discredit the mystery because hucksters jump in on the game. What's your perspective on all of that?
Oh yeah, well, especially now that when I'm using the word paranormal or supernatural, it's such pop culture now, and it's such, like you said, more widely accepted that everybody and their brother thinks they can get their 5 minutes of fame by faking something and getting on a social media site, faking something and get 10 million views, right? So I think a lot of that's what's driving the hoaxers, but there's always been hoaxers out there. It's just even more prevalent now with the advancements in social media and the various, channels and such that people can get 50 million views and make some serious cash on. So, I think that's driving a lot of that now. But on the flip side of that, there's a whole competition going on in various fields of the paranormal that Joe Blow wants to be the first one to capture, say a Bigfoot on tape. So, and there's a lot of competition. So when someone does get a good piece of evidence that may in fact be real, all these other people jump on the bandwagon and say, "Oh no, that's faked," because they want to be the first one to discover the next missing link between man and ape or whatever the case may be, right? Or they want to be the first guy to see the little green aliens come out of the ship and say, "Well, hey, we're here,"
But do you
So
feel like we already, well, for instance, let's say with UFOs, the outside of testimonies from people seem very credible to me, and people that are astrophysicists that worked within the government, Air Force, people like yourself, do you feel like we already have evidence of the afterlife in terms of ghosts, and whether it be in the form of EVPs or photos from, let's say, the Entity case with Barry Taff and all that stuff? Or even Bigfoot stuff, like the Patterson Gimlin film. A lot of people feel that's the real deal, even though how coincidental was that they were making a Bigfoot documentary and Bigfoot walks by, stuff like that.
right,
Do you,
right.
in the variety, what do you feel are the most credible? And you can even say throughout history, but even now, it's like the government sitting there confirming it right on nightly news.
Yeah, I mean, for me, most definitely the UFO situation, I think, is the most evidence is out there for that, I would say. Now, depending what your religious beliefs are and different things like that, I think there's a very strong case with what happens to us when we die. We're not just a body and we die and that's it. I think and many people for literally thousands of years have talked about this. Many different cultural backgrounds, that we are made of pure energy and we don't just simply die and that's it. We go somewhere else or we transform. And if you believe in reincarnation, then there's a ton of evidence out there on that too. Some really fascinating stuff and stories and accounts that there's no way these things could have been faked. So there's a lot more to it than I think a lot of people even realize. Now, Bigfoot, when it comes to cryptids like, Bigfoot and other things, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the giant squid was thought, or the kraken, for lack of another word, was thought to be a myth. But it turns out Japanese sailors caught a real live kraken in their nets several years ago. 65-foot long giant squid. I mean, the kraken is real, folks. They're finding stuff on this planet daily. There's a brand new species of orangutan discovered in Sumatra in 2017 that was right under their noses. They didn't even know it was right there. And there's you can go on and on and on with this stuff. So, if you're closed-minded and you believe everything you've been brainwashed to believe your entire life, and you don't have an open mind, then sure, none of this stuff is real. But if you take the time to research and look into it more, you'll soon discover that there are many unsolved mysteries and many things going on all around us to right now, literally right now.
But I ask every guest this on the way out of the episode, and no answer is right or wrong. So whatever you say is the right answer. In other words, like it's right for you, and that's what I want you to say. So what I want to ask you is, if you retain your consciousness on the way out of this mortal life, when your body dissipates and you move out of here, and if you believe that, what would you like to take with you?
I'd like to take all the good memories of my kids and all the great people in my life that I've met, just the happiness of this life, and we all have to remember that tomorrow's never promised, and you got to live life to its fullest and really appreciate the life you've been given, because tomorrow is not promised, and you could be here today and gone tomorrow. And I think it's important to cherish the good times and the good people and your family in your lives, because you'll never have that again. You may have another family if you believe in reincarnation, but this one you'll never have again. So
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garetano, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight. My estimation is that our world is more mysterious than ever. I'm going to continue to explore the unknown for the remainder of my time in this life. It's true that many great minds with far more resources than most of us could imagine have delivered a considerable force of effort to solve these mysteries. Personally, it's not my desire to necessarily solve them. I'm more interested in learning about the people that have dedicated their lives to it. It's those unique stories that excite me. When a good tale is told, we not only learn about the individual, but if it's told right, we enter their world for a moment and learn something new about ourselves. There will be many paranormal discussions on Off to the Witch, but I'm primarily interested in a good story. Next week is something a little different. We'll explore the fascination of the monster kid. No, it's not some strange cryptid out of the dark Carpathian mountains, but it's many of us that grew up with both a fascination for legend and fiction. It's our love for the dark and mysterious in the form of monster movies and scary cinema. What is it in the deep primal human mind that fascinates us about these genres? Join us next week to find out.